Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board. I hope your week went well. I'm stacking up some podcasts as I have, again, some more traveling coming up. So you got to strike while the iron's hot, or out here in Montana and elsewhere, they'll say you got to make hay while the sun shines. So in any event, we're glad to have you on board. If you're wondering what Living the Wildlife is all about, well, this is a podcast where we focus on research-based information to help professionals and newbies alike to responsibly resolve conflicts with vertebrate pests. And that's what it is, plain and simple, where we would kind of take some deep dives into a lot of things related to vertebrate control that's beyond the ordinary of what you're normally just getting. How do I control X? How do I control Y? We get into the harder details so that because we want to advance your skills beyond just simply the general technician level. All right, well, as you can tell, I have my website up here. This is the Vertebrate Pest Handbook. I'm pleased to announce that I was able to get the book finally through global publishing. I publish through lulu.com, not advertising the site, I just use Lulu. And so I finally got it accepted into global distribution. So for those of you who are listening to the podcast outside of the U.S., you're going to be able to get copies of the book that way, or it's also available through print and available through ebook as well. So that can certainly substantially save costs. You don't have shipping. I sent a review copy off to Australia, New Zealand, I forgot which, and oh my gosh, it was amazing. It cost near twice the price of the book. So it was amazing, right? So definitely shipping costs are quite high indeed. Nevertheless, so if you need to reach me, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for new shows. Perhaps there's a topic. You know, as people know, I do consultation services. So if you ask me directly for an answer, I'm happy to do that for you, but I will charge. But if you say, hey, I would be interested if you ever get to this particular topic, throw it out there, and if I answer it, then you get that information for free. But I also encourage you that there's a ton of information that I've put out there. There are very few Vantassels in the world, and so if you put in Stephen Vantassel, spelled with a Stephen, you'll find there's even fewer of us. It is not hard to find my information out on the web, and I have a lot of it. Of course, my podcast up on Rumble and as well as YouTube, you can find my information there. So I've covered an enormous amount of topics over the past several years, but there are, of course, always more to do. Enough about that. So why don't we get started with today's topic? Wanted to talk, I know it's really not the best time of the year to be discussing this, but the reality is you kind of have to prepare for those of you that are involved in using deer repellents to reduce damage to your client's property. Now, in some states, you have to have a pesticide license to spray repellents. Some states you don't. I believe when I was back in Nebraska, it was not a requirement to have the license. I, of course, always check your state's Department of Agriculture to see what the pesticide laws are in your particular area. Nevertheless, there is a relatively new product. It came to America. It was registered in March 17th, 2022, but I don't think it was registered in all of the states available that have deer issues. And so certainly we had it registered, I believe, in Montana last year, but it wasn't, believe it or not, registered in Minnesota. When I checked for this year, it was registered. So check your particular state, because of course, your state may have requirements to have it registered in order to use it within your own particular state. So I want to talk a little about, because it uses a different active ingredient than what's normally out there. Now, I normally don't talk a lot about repellents other than to bash them, because they often fail to work the way clients would like them to work. However, deer is one of those exceptions, right? And actually, deer repellents are the most studied of the repellents at least as far as the U.S. is concerned. And the research is enormous, right? So I was able to find a publication on this particular product because it actually hails from Europe, and it finally found its way here to the United States and got registered here. So the active ingredient is sheep's fat. Now you're going to say, well, I don't want to be dealing with deer. Why don't we just shoot them? Well, you can't shoot deer in every situation. There are a lot of places, of course, where where people don't want to shoot deer. So they just want the deer to stop browsing on their valued ornamentals. And so this is an area where people who are doing pesticide applications, because repellents, of course, are a pesticide, it's important to know about the products that are available, and perhaps this is something you might want to do a little experiment on in your particular area to see how it works for you and whether you like the product or not. Because the reality is we don't have any great products. We have good products, but we really don't have great products. And understand that no matter how good a repellent is, it's not going to resolve a problem if you have high deer densities. So if a deer has a choice between starving to death and eating bad tasting food, it's going to eat bad tasting food. So this is one of the things that kind of screws up repellents, is that you have to always be thinking about what kind of deer pressure do you have in the area, because if you have high deer pressure, it really won't matter what you're spraying on there. It just maybe delay the feeding, but when they feed through everything else, they're going to come for the product that has the repellent on. So there's a lot of issues with repellents, but I'm not here to bash repellents necessarily today, talking about this relatively new product and the research that was done on it, and see if it's something that fits for you. I don't make any money off this. I don't have any agreement with the manufacturer. I'm just providing you some of this information to see if it works for you. I do think on a professional level that a lot of wildlife control operators should be thinking about getting into the repellent spraying business. I think there's money in this, and it's certainly, when you think about it, you don't have to be dealing with ladders. And that is always a win, in my opinion, especially for those of us who are getting older. Is it really worth it? But this is a way people want to have solutions for resolving deer damage, especially those of you living in wealthier areas where the ambiance and look of the property is very important, and people who really care about the landscaping of their property. And some of them will have a lot of money poured into that, and they really can't afford or don't want to lose all their investment to feeding deer. Well, this particular product is called Trico. As I said before, it is the active ingredient is sheep's fat. Now, you may think to another product that we'll be talking about here shortly, and that is plant skid. Plant skid is made off of bovine and I believe pig's blood as well. So you can see this kind of a theme being set up here, right? So we're dealing with material that's been extracted from the ranching field and slaughterhouses, and so this sheep's fat is what's the active ingredient here, and it's not even 10% sheep's fat. And so what can you use it for? Well, according to the label, you can use it for deer. It repels rabbits, elk, and moose. So that's a pretty broad range of material, and it will help stop browsing, bark stripping, and of course even rubbing. Of course, rubbing would occur when bucks are trying to get the velvet off of their antlers, of course. Interestingly, it has a shelf life of 2 years. That's a pretty good thing. And this is the kicker I want you to look at, and that has a residual value of 6 to 8 months. So one of the challenges with repellents is how often you have to reapply, either because the plant has grown or the plant has been washed off with rain, I mean, the material has been washed off the plant because of rain, or the plant is simply grown. Now, in this case, it's 6 to 8 months. That is absolutely amazing. But is it true for your situation, right? It's manufacturers can put things on the label. Was that done under ideal circumstances? What was the data on that? The data isn't always made available to the public. It may be made available to the EPA. And this is where you have to get sort of university-based research on particular products that are sort of based outside of the corporation, so you don't have issues of commercial secrets and that sort of thing, because the researcher is going to divulge all of their data as a general rule. So does it work for you, right? We've all purchased products that you're seeing reviews by others and maybe the things from the manufacturer, and you're like, well, that wasn't my experience, right? So was that a one-off, or is that just a characteristic because your situation is the average person's situation is a lot more complicated than what the research was done under. So it's complicated, right? So let's continue on to some more information. What about application? If a product is too difficult to apply, it's not going to be practical for you, right? So you recall from the previous slide, we have to be careful of not letting it freeze, right? So if you have it in storage, you need to make sure you're storing it in an area where the product freezes. Once the product freezes, it's useless, right? So something right from the label. So what about when you can apply it? So understand there's no mixing with this particular product. It's ready to go. And you're going to have to apply it between 35 degrees and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that's can be a little bit of a challenge. So it means that if you're in one of the more northern tier states, you have got to be applying this product late fall before you start getting freezing to make sure that everything's warm enough to allow you to spray, because you can't have it freeze in your sprayer either, right? You need to avoid direct sunlight, especially on hot days, and you can't apply anything else to the plant 7 days prior to your application and 7 days after your application. Of course, like many pesticides, you have to be sure it's shaken thoroughly so the product is properly mixed. And the dosage rate is about 0.13 fluid ounces per plant, or anywhere from 1 to 2.2 gallons per acre. So I would assume there's sort of how many, getting that plant area. Remember, when you're spraying repellents for deer, for example, you're kind of looking at about 6 feet down, okay? Where if you're dealing with a moose or an elk, you're going to need to go up a little bit higher than that, of course. Up to 2 applications a year. So even if you wanted to apply it more, you can't. You can only apply twice a year. And so how well does it go? Well, let's talk about some safety things first before we get into some of the research data. There's a 12-hour re-entry interval required, so that's something you're going to have to be sure you tell your clients. It does have some moderate eye irritation if you get the liquid into your eye. Of course, you don't want to be doing that. You need to make sure you wash and shower after your application and change your clothes, just like many other pesticides, which is sort of kind of weird, right? I mean, you're like, it's just sheep's fat, or maybe it's some of the products that are the non-active ingredients, right? Because remember, there's still 95.6%. 94.5. No, that would be 93.6. Sorry, I'll get it out eventually. 93.6 percentage of materials of other ingredients that are the non-actives, right? So you need to make sure you're avoiding getting this product on your skin. I guess there's some irritation issues, and also it said if it's absorbed, it could cause harm. So there seems to be some issues of absorption through the skin, perhaps, and it said it can create a skin rash. And of course, don't breathe the mist, right? So watch which way the wind is blowing. Keep your wits about it, especially when you're spraying above your head, right? You don't want to be under it. You want to be sure that you're keeping your wits about you when you're working with this particular product and all pesticidal products, right? So the research was done in New York State, outside of Rochester. Now, Rochester is way up in the northern part of New York State, so it gets plenty cold, lots of snow typically up there, and they do have some deer issues, to be sure. And so this research was done out of the University of Cornell. At least one of the faculty members that was on it was from the University of Cornell. And they were testing it on ewes, and you can see the scientific name. The reason is because ewes are a favored plant for deer, and these would have been white-tailed deer. They went into suburban neighborhoods. Now, what they did here was they didn't look for ewes that were already native in the soil. They purchased ewe plants, and that way they had them in their own potted plant, and then they would position them in these properties, and they would take pictures of the plants prior to their putting them out there. Then they would treat the plant. Of course, then they had control areas and then treatment areas. And then what they would do after, I think it was 8 weeks, they went back and photographed the plants to see how much damage was done. And they had a little scale that determined how much damage. And then they would compare that with the damage of the ewe plants that were not treated. So the temperature range of this particular area, the areas that they studied at, I think there were 4 key areas, was between 2 degrees and 79 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you can see the snow in centimeters, and the center about 2.5 centimeters for an inch, right? To kind of give you an idea how much snowfall. And I guess it was a relatively light snowfall. You can see that 3.6. That's not a lot of snow. So they were below, I believe it said they were below average for the snowfall as a general rule in that particular area. So what were the results? You're like, Stephen, let's get to the results. All right, here are the results. This comes directly from the publication itself. So you can see there were 4 areas where they were testing the product. Birch Hills Drive, Fairview Crescent, Pine Grove Ave, and St. Boulevard Ave. Now, if you're wondering what these black dots are, these black dots were individual trees, planters that they put out in these people's yards. And the reason is because the bars are giving you what the average was. And then the black dots are giving you the actual numbers of plants that were in the numbers that they were damaged at. So the higher the number, the higher the level of damage that occurred with the plant. So a 5 was severe damage, and a 0, of course, was unnoticeable damage. Now, they confirmed that there were deer at every one of these locations, but you can see all the column A's were treated with tricho. And this is amazing. So here we have an example where tricho, and then B is going to be plant skid, and then C is the control. And you can see how the C column always is high, right? So here we have even some individual plants. We have 3 plants here that are level 5. We have 2 plants here level 4, but then we have others. And then, of course, the average is almost a 4 for all the plants that were tested. This is the control. That means the ewes were put out there and there were no repellents placed on those plants. But notice how minimal the damage was for both the plant skid and the tricho. So plant skid in this particular area actually did better than the tricho, because the tricho had 1 plant that was actually at a level 1 damage, where the plant skid had no plants at the level 1 damage. So you can see how this is why when you drill down into products, you can when one person says, I had excellent control with X, Y, and Z, and you may have tried it in your particular area, and you're like, well, that product sucks. Well, it doesn't mean either of you are lying. It just shows you how hard it is to evaluate these products, and that there's differences in each one of these areas. That you may have higher deer pressure in your particular area than the other person, right? So maybe you didn't apply it the way it should have been. Maybe the temperature was wrong. Maybe you didn't get good coverage. Maybe you didn't mix the product well. There's so many variables for how this is why when you're looking at peer-reviewed research, they try to control for all those variables. Right? But your results can differ from this, but we're just looking at what the results were from this study in northern New York. And here we have an example in Pine Grove, right? Everything failed. Tricho failed, plant skid failed, and of course the control failed, right? The control basically fails everywhere it's tried, right? So we know that if you're not treating the plants, the deer are just going to chow down unless there's so few deer to begin with, right? So here we have in the Pine Grove area, everything gets trashed, right? So no big surprise there. But when you look at Birch Hills Drive, here we have the control area. Every plant is at a level 5. That means it just got devastated. And I'll show you some pictures of what level 5 looks like. Here we have plant skid. Every plant treated with plant skid also failed. And look at how good Tricho did here. Only one planting had level 1 damage. That's amazing. Now we go over to Fairview Crescent. All the plants treated with Tricho had basically 0 damage. Plant skid did pretty well here, right? The average is that the plants only suffered a 1 degree of damage, right? A level 1 damage, and yet all of the control plants got ravaged. So you can see how so you may say, maybe you might want to try, maybe plant skid's cheaper than Tricho. I don't know what prices are, but when you're evaluating your plantings and what your repellents that you're going to be trying to use, price has to be part of it, right? Unless your client is like, I don't care what it costs, I want the best. Now, maybe Tricho is less expensive than plant skid. I have no idea. I did not look at prices for these particular products. But that's certainly a legitimate question for you, because you as a professional need to evaluate not just what is effective, but what is cost effective, right? So if your client can suffer maybe level 1 damage to their plants and plant skid's cheaper, then why not, right? So it's the point is what's going to work, because if they can't afford it, then it really doesn't matter, right? So this is where you're looking at. Well, let me show you a different way of viewing some of this information. This makes it a little bit easier for you, right? But you can see I've labeled all of these products. Tricho did essentially pretty well across the board except for Site 3. Site 3, everything failed, right? So must have been heavy deer pressure there. But everything else, Tricho really is way out there, and yet in Site 4, Tricho and plant skid are pretty much the same, right? Where here in Site 2, plant skid, it had some level 1 damage, but Tricho still was pretty good at basically level 0 damage. So overall, Tricho won in this particular study that was done, but plant skid had some moments here that were impressive, right? So don't throw plant skid under the bus just yet. It's maybe something you want to be thinking about in terms of application. Now, one thing that the study did talk about, and that is that they found that plant skid was a little bit more difficult to handle, and because it would clog the sprayers. And so I don't know, I'm just going on the basis of what I've read here, but that may be something that you have to keep in the back of your mind if you're looking at the spray version of plant skid. So let's kind of summarize the results here, right? So Tricho, I said 8 weeks. I was wrong. It's actually 12 weeks. So Tricho protected ewes, which is a highly favored plant among deers, right? So they were picking plants that deer love to eat. And they protected the ewes for 12 weeks at 3 of the 4 sites that they did their study at. Plant skid treated plants did not differ from control plants overall, but as I said before, there were exceptions to this, right? There were places where plant skid did fairly well. They did say that Tricho was easier to apply than the plant skid powder. However, they did note that you could not apply Tricho during freezing temperatures, so that means you as an applicator have to be sure you're timing this right? So you can't be skipping. You got to watch the weather. You got to be seeing what season it is. because if you wait too long, you're not going to be able to apply, especially if you're in a cold snap and you don't get a warm-up to be able to give you a chance to apply the particular product. You also can't apply it when the plants are covered by snow and ice, right? So that can be very difficult for those of you in wetter areas of the east where it also gets cold, where you get things like freezing rain and slush and that sort of thing. And that can be quite challenging. So logistically, scheduling can be a problem, especially if you have a large service area and a lot of clients. And that's basically it for what we're going to talk about there. So I hope you found that helpful for you and something to think about, because if you haven't considered getting into deer repellents and you are licensed to apply pesticides, it is something for you certainly to be thinking about. Contact your Department of Ag. I think this is an area where wildlife control operators and vertebrate pest specialists are leaving a lot of money on the table. And of course, what repellent do you need to use? Well, you have plant skid as an option. You also have tricho as an option. And you could visit one of my other podcasts where I talk about deer repellents in general to talk about some other options for you in terms of the chemical treatment of plants to protect them from deer browse. Well, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. I'm Stephen Vantassel. I'm your host of Living the Wildlife. So I'd love to hear from you. Definitely would love to have you subscribe to the channel. Definitely ring the bell so you can make sure you're getting updates on our publication. Those of you I am published, I should say, on both YouTube, and then I publish over on Rumble. If you want to look me up on Rumble, look me up at Wildlife Control Consultant. And of course, there's a wealth of information that we have there. You can certainly reach out to me if you wish at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear your thoughts, comments, suggestions for new shows. Perhaps you'd like to be on the show. I'd love having guests on, because there's so much I think we can learn and share from one another. Perhaps you have a new product you'd like to sell. Definitely reach out. And of course, those of you out into the in the fields, perhaps you have need of certain services like some training information. Of course, I have a lot of publications that are available. A lot of them are available for free. Some are available for purchase. I do consultation. Perhaps you need to give a presentation somewhere. You can also hire me for helping put together your PowerPoint so that you look professional and get good quality content out to the public, and I can help you work through that as well. So thanks so much for listening. Till next time, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.